Hi everyone, welcome to another video for Communications 1. In this video I'm going to go over how to use a few more of the tools in Illustrator like swatches and creating your own hatches and creating your own strokes and doing some kind of fun stuff with the editing tools and going into a bit of the drawing utilities of Illustrator, which again we'd always advise you to draw in Rhino, but there are some circumstances where you can draw a little bit in Illustrator. But I'm going to show you how to do both today and you can kind of decide for yourselves. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own personal stroke. This is really fun if you want to add like lots of arrows in a line. You don't have to draw each individual arrow. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go over to, just to make sure everyone's on this, I'm using the Essentials Classic layout settings, and that's all explained in a previous video. So I want to open up my brushes window. So to do that, you go into Window. So up the top here, there's a whole series of settings. And these are all a whole series of windows that you can open that all do really interesting and helpful things. So the one we want to open today is called Brushes. So open up Brushes. Now these are a series of brushes that, a few of these are kind of preset saved brushes, and we're going to start to add to them. And there's a little clue in here what we're going to do. But anyway, so the first thing I want to do is I want to draw the pattern that I want to repeat along a stroke. So let's say I wanted to use an arrow and I want to have a repeating arrow as a stroke. I need to actually draw the arrow first. So to draw the arrow, I'm just going to select the pen tool. So the pen tool's over here, or you can just press P on your keyboard. So that's the little bracketed key there. So if I just hit P on my keyboard, the pen tool opens. Now, I'm just going to draw a really simple arrow. So just select that. Oh, yeah, fun little trick. So if you click on a line in Illustrator and you hold Alt on your keyboard, if you're holding Alt and you hover over the line, see how my mouse changes to two different cursors? And I move away and it's just one cursor, and I go back and it changes to two. That means it's going to duplicate the line. So if I hold Alt, click the line, hold Shift, and then drag down, it creates a perfect duplicate of that line. And so that's really good if you want to create a whole series of copies. Just a fun little neat trick there. So I've just selected that line. I'm just going to go right click, transform, and reflect. This is kind of exactly similar to the Rhino command reflect. I'm just going to select that's fine because I know it's flipped now, and that's good. So go OK. I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to match that back there. So this is how I create an arrow in Illustrator if I was to draw in Illustrator, and then just draw another line to join those up. Select all my lines, right click and go join. Now I've got a triangle, which is good. Then I'm going to select that triangle and hold Shift X, and that's actually going to flip these two stroke and fill colors. So Shift X. So X changes the one you're working on, and then Shift X changes what it is on the shape, which is cool. So now I've got a triangle. Then I'm just going to go P for pen tool again, and I'm just going to draw a straight line moving away from my arrow. Hit V to cancel that, reselect it, go Shift X, change stroke and fill, and so now I've got a nice arrow. I'm just going to make that a bit fatter. That's good. Cool. So this is my arrow in Illustrator, not too complicated to create. Then all you have to do is select your arrow and then drag it into the brushes box. That's it. Then you get this new brush prompt. I want to go to pattern brush, because I'm going to create a pattern. So just the bottom pattern brush, go OK. Now you get a whole series of really cool settings. And you get a preview of what the stroke is going to look like down here. So I'm going to call this Tom's arrow brush. Just name it there. Now the first thing you want to do, and the most important thing to do, is to click down here or under fit and say approximate path. So that's always do that first up. You can play with these other settings, but for today, this is the most important setting to remember, is to click this option here. Then, essentially, what these other commands and things allow you to do is allow you to edit how the command works. So each of these symbols shows you where you're editing and what it's going to look like. So you can kind of use these drop-down menus here to change what your stroke is going to look like at each of those points. And this is like kind of the full spectrum of the stroke's shape. So maybe, see how at the end of that corner there, it has a little indent? Maybe I want to have it so the arrows meet up like that, rather than bend in the middle. Or maybe I want them to bend in a way that's more precise, like have a space and just go none. Or I want them to kind of auto-generate this, auto-slice it, so just kind of trying to find the middle. And I think you can do some more complex stuff, but for today we're just going to go have a space there. Then in the middle, again, you can add more settings. There's kind of these weird, oh gosh, this is getting too confusing. Just stick to this for now. So you can kind of edit how they change and they flip, and you can go flip along the edge. You can change the size and do all kinds of really fun things. You can also add some spacing. So if I go 100%, that's the full width of the arrow is going to be spaced out. So, you could do this kind of thing, but maybe we just want to keep it sort of simple. And let's just go 50% space. So that kind of indicates the spacing and the size between, between the fixes. And there's other kind of things you can do, but I'm not exactly sure what this does. That might be more complicated. Okay, so that's fine for now. Let's just say this is our stroke, and I'm just going to go OK. Good, so now I've added Tom's arrow brush here, which is good. So I can delete this, and now using the pen tool, I'm just going to draw a straight or a kind of a curved line. So to draw with Illustrator's pen tool, you just click on the page, and that starts the pen tool like this. Then if I click again, and I hold down the click, and I drag away, I create like a point on Illustrator, which kind of like creates that vector. So it's kind of very similar to Rhino, but slightly different. So I've created a curved arc, and then it says, where do you want to go next? I don't really want to go anywhere, so I'm just going to hit V on my keyboard to cancel. So just to quickly go over that. So these are the selection tools of Illustrator. So there's V and A. So the selection tool and the direct selection tool. Maybe I'll go over quickly how those work in a second. But V is a good way of cancelling commands in Illustrator. Anyway, so I'm going to select my curve, and I'm going to select my brush, and there are my arrows on the page. Now you may notice that they're quite large. Maybe you want them to be a bit smaller. To make them a bit smaller, you just select the curve and go down to your point size, and you can just reduce the point size. And now you've got a whole series of smaller arrows, and you can go really small. So this is a really fun way of adding sort of a bit more detail to your drawings, and I noticed a few of the students were adding arrows in places, and it's good to kind of add them manually first, because then you can kind of understand the benefit of doing things a bit faster in this way, and how to use them more precise. This isn't always the best way to add arrows, and so that's kind of the basics of editing and creating your own strokes. Now you can get pretty cool with this, so you don't have to just do arrows. You can kind of do all kinds of fun stuff. So let's delete that, and I'm just going to draw another line, and this is maybe a good segue into what these selection tools do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a couple lines in Illustrator, some kind of curvy lines. So if I select the page, I can kind of make some kind of fun squiggles. And so this is how the drawing in Illustrator works. So it is good, and once you understand how it works, it's not too bad of a drawing program. This process is just a lot easier in Rhino, and so later we can get into drawing your own things in Illustrator. Drawing your own things in Rhino, and then taking them into Illustrator. So let's say I wanted to create some squiggles. That's fine. I'm just going to actually rotate these so they're straight. That's good. Okay, so this is a good segue into the selection tools. So the the selection tool, which is the key for V, if you select that, it just selects an entire line in its entirety. So when I select that line, the whole line highlights. Nothing crazy about that. However, if I use the direct selection tool, so I hit A on my keyboard, or I can click it over here. When I then select a line, see how all the points that I drew open up. This is a more kind of precise editing tool. So I can actually, they're called anchors, rather than points in Illustrator. So I can actually drag and select those points, so I can get really specific with my editing. And you can kind of pull those handles to then manipulate where the anchors sit. And yeah, so that's the selection tool and the direct selection tool. So V for the selection tool, so selecting things. Then I hit A on my keyboard, and I can select the points and be really precise with my curves. Anyway, so now that I've drawn a few fun curves, I can select those curves, and just like before, I can drag that straight into the brushes panel, go pattern brush, go OK. And you can see I've got a pretty interesting pattern here. For this one, it's, again, you can get kind of a bit more interesting with how they overlap at the corners. Maybe you want it to kind of overlap everywhere. Maybe that's too much. What did I select here? Order between. Let's do that. It's important to keep the spacing 0 for these kinds of hatches, because if I go sort of 50, you get this kind of blocks. It looks a bit strange. So let's just go 0. Approximate path, call it Tom's silly line. Go OK. So now I can delete these. Hit P for pen. Draw my big curve like this. Make that point size 0.7. Then I select my silly curve. Oh, and it's really large. So what I need to do is I need to go down to 0.25. So the original size of the stroke will be how big it appears at 0.1. So keep that in mind when you're creating your curves. So if I go 0.05, there we go. It's really kind of this nice, these nice kind of squiggles. And I can, okay, so then the other thing is I've drawn a new curve, and I want this curve to match the properties of this curve. So you notice if I select this curve again, it's going to go back to that original size, which is actually pretty cool. But let's say I want to match the exact properties of this. I can use the ink dropper command or tool. So no, it's actually, there it is. So the ink, the eyedropper tool. I call it ink because the command is I on the keyboard. So what that does is it'll match whatever properties you've selected. So if I select this curve, hit I on the keyboard, I get this little eyedropper, and I select that curve, and it should match the properties. But it didn't, and I don't know why. That usually works. I'm not sure why that didn't work. Anyway, let's just go and select that. I can go sort of 0.1, and you can kind of get pretty fun with this. So have fun kind of creating your own interesting strokes. Of course, you can go into Rhino first, and you can go curve, and you can create your own kind of fun patterns in Rhino first. And then you could theoretically take that into Illustrator. That wouldn't be a problem at all. So you could just create some fun curves, file, export that, and then take that into Illustrator, which I might show you a bit more in detail a bit later. Great, so that's the basics of creating your own strokes. Now let's create our own hatches. So to create your own hatch, there's a few ways, but the easiest way I think is this way. So the first thing I want to do is create a rectangle. So that's M on the keyboard. So just create a rectangle, and then I'm just going to give it a hatch from one of the preset hatches. So let's go decorative, and let's just go textures. So we've done this before. Make sure that you're using the fill setting there, and let's just select this texture. Good. I can actually delete this now. So the first thing I want to do, I also want to turn off the stroke. Okay, so it's just a hatch without a stroke, and it's just one of the preset hatches. So what you want to do is I think you can go over here. So this is your swatches box. We can also bring this up by going over to Window and going to Swatches. So swatches are like all the different kind of saved swatches you've got, and this is going to become more important as you become more organized, and you can save your own swatches and have your own swatch folders as you begin to edit them. So you can see here how when I've selected the fill for this swatch, this is the swatch here. So it's actually going, okay, you've used this one. So this is like almost like a history of the swatches you've used, and you can save them and they enter these folders down here. So for example, if I was to select a different swatch, I know it's really small on the screen, but that's just how Illustrator works. And let's say I selected this one, this kind of commonly used one. And again, if we see anybody using this, ooh, it's not good. You can see how it kind of appears here. So it's called sand. So there's the two swatches that I've got. And the more you add, the more you kind of use, the more they'll add to the history. So that's good. So the way we want to edit this is if you double click on that, it opens up the hatch editing window. Now there's a whole series of ways of creating your own hatches. I personally find this just the simplest way, is you use a hatch, then you just start to edit it, and simple as that. This is really good. So what happens now is the hatch and the swatch, they become curves. So if I move this around, they actually move in a kind of consecutive pattern, so you can see exactly how it's going to look when you finish editing it. So you can sort of select the dots if you didn't want to have the dots, and slowly go through and delete all the dots and just leave the kind of the pebbly shapes. So you can actually edit the hatches that are in Illustrator. Or we can delete everything altogether and just be left with nothing on the screen. And then we can start to draw our own shapes. And it does get a little bit trippy in here. So don't get too swayed. So the screen will move around a little bit and it'll start to get a bit awkward. But just, yeah, just kind of bear with it. It's a bit of a strange process. And you can sort of move curves over the edge and they'll start to appear behind one another eventually. So this is a really good way of kind of seeing how it's going to look when you start to actually hatch it all together. And all the same kind of editing tools like the direct selection tool all apply here. And you can kind of copy things over holding Alt. And you can see how that conflicts there. That's actually going to look quite strange as a hatch. So I might actually just delete that and just add one more little curve. There. Maybe move that down. Good. So let's say I wanted this as my my hatch. I would then go save a copy. So don't go done, because that's going to override the hatch that you've already started to edit. So I'm going to go save a copy. I'm going to call it Tom's pattern. Go OK. A new pattern's been added to the swatches panel. Great. Then I can go done. And now there's my hatch. So it's not great, it's a bit tiled, you can kind of see there's gaps and things in it, so you can have fun and kind of edit these. But what that means is I can kind of delete this, create my own shapes, and I can go over to the hatches panel. So there's the sand, there's that one, and I think it should still be here. Yeah, so it's fine, it's still there, but my Tom's pattern is there, which is good. And so now we can start to do really fun stuff with this. So I mentioned before that you can switch the fill and the stroke by holding Shift X. So if I go, if I change my hatch to the stroke, you can see it just looks like these kind of dashed lines. We can actually start to do some really fun stuff with this. So just going to go back and delete this. I'm going to draw another curve now. I'm just going to draw it in black so you can see. So there's my curve. Now if I select my curve and I make it really large, so let's make it like 0.18 or something, so a kind of a really large curve. And I did go over this stuff before, but I told you how to kind of edit your strokes. You can kind of give them fun patterns and things in this drop-down menu. So let's say I give it this pattern, so it kind of looks like this kind of wavy line. If I then go and I select Tom's pattern, you can actually start to get some really cool kind of curved kind of, I don't know, yeah, patterns. So if I make that larger, I can go to like 60, and that's going to start to create some really interesting patterns as I draw. So I can kind of shrink this down, and you can kind of get some really, really crazy things happening. And so you can kind of add this to your drawings in this way. And so here, again, the stroke is really small, but as soon as I make it larger, I can get some really interesting things going on in Illustrator. So of course, through all of this, you can be drawing these things in Rhino. So curve tool, and I can always go select these. I can go File, Export Selected, Illustrator, call it Tom Test, and I can add my curves from Rhino to Illustrator, which we know. So I can go Control C, Control V, and then I can start to maybe make a stroke out of these. So I could, theoretically make these smaller, make these thinner, give these a really cool pattern so they all kind of wave away. Then I can drag this into my brushes, go pattern brush, proximate path, go to auto centered, auto in between, go OK, delete those, and then I can, it's just as simple as kind of doing like that. And you get some, ooh, they look kind of cool. So yeah, you can do all kinds of really interesting things by editing your own hatches. That's probably enough for now, and I'll keep kind of releasing more kind of videos in Illustrator of kind of all the interesting things you can do. So I hope that was helpful. Have a play around. You can do much more interesting things than what I did here with those simple tools by really pushing the limits. But yeah, cool. Thank you very much. I'll see you after StuVac. Bye.